Ford has a long history of innovation, experimentation, and pushing automotive boundaries, but not every idea made it to the showroom. Some Ford cars were too radical, too powerful, or too dangerous to release to the public, and many were quietly banned, canceled, or scrapped before production. These are 9 incredible Ford cars that were built but never officially sold, and most people have never seen them.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 9. Ford wasn't just an American giant, it was also a major player in global markets, with its British subsidiary Ford of Britain producing cars specifically for European needs. Among those was the Ford Zephyr, first introduced in 1950 and updated through the decade. By 1958, the Zephyr had become one of the most popular family cars in the UK, offering a practical mid-size design, economical performance, and modern styling. But while the Zephyr was a success in Europe, it ran into a wall, literally a rulebook wall, when enthusiasts and racers tried to bring it into American stock car competition. The 1958 Ford Zephyr was a very different machine from the big American Fords of the same year. While American buyers leaned toward heavy, chrome-laden cars with large displacement V8s, the Zephyr offered smaller 4- and 6-cylinder engines, lighter weight, and tighter dimensions, perfect for European roads but unusual for the US. On paper, this made the Zephyr an interesting candidate for certain stock car and short-track events in America. Its lighter weight and nimble handling gave it potential in classes where sheer horsepower wasn't the only deciding factor. Here's where the conflict began. In the 1950s, most U.S. racing leagues, particularly NASCAR and regional stock car circuits, required cars to be domestic stock. That meant the vehicle had to be produced and sold by an American manufacturer in the United States. The car had to be a 4-passenger vehicle available to the public in significant numbers. The parts, engines, and body had to conform to U.S. stock production standards. Even though the Zephyr wore the Ford badge, it was considered a foreign-built car, manufactured in Britain and not officially marketed as a domestic model in the U.S. This immediately made it ineligible for many sanctioned stock car events. The ban wasn't personal against the Zephyr. It was about protecting the integrity of American stock racing. Organizers feared that allowing imports, even from Ford's own British arm, would open the door to loopholes. Suddenly, smaller, lighter cars with different engineering could upset the balance in classes built around American full-size sedans. The Zephyr's straight-six engines and compact build gave it a performance profile that didn't fit the mold of stock U.S. cars. So, to avoid confusion and maintain a level playing field, leagues simply barred cars like the Zephyr from competition. The Zephyr's ban also reflected a broader cultural tension in 1950s America. Imported cars, whether from Europe or Japan, were still novelties. Domestic manufacturers and race promoters wanted to keep racing an all-American spectacle, reinforcing the idea that racing victories sold American cars. Allowing the Zephyr into the mix would have blurred that patriotic narrative. Interestingly, by the 1960s, imported cars would begin making inroads into U.S. racing, especially in sports car and endurance racing. But in 1958, the Zephyr was simply ahead of its time. While it was admired in the UK for its balance of performance and practicality, in the US, it became a footnote in racing history, barred from the stock car circuits despite its Ford heritage. The 1958 Ford Zephyr highlights how racing regulations weren't just about safety or performance, they were about identity, market protection, and cultural perception. Though it carried the Ford badge, its status as a UK-built import meant it couldn't compete in American stock car racing, reinforcing the divide between US domestic cars and the growing international automotive scene.
Number 8. The 1959 Ford Anglia. This car wasn't built in Detroit, Dearborn, or anywhere in America. It came from Ford of Britain, designed for narrow roads, small garages, and a customer base that cared more about fuel economy than horsepower. In England, the Anglia was a clever, compact family car.
But when Ford considered exporting it to the United States, it ran into a serious problem. It didn't meet American crash and safety standards. That mismatch between design and regulation meant that, in effect, the Anglia was banned from official import sales in the U.S. during its early years. 1. The 1959 Ford Anglia, a British darling. The Anglia name had been around since the late 1930s, but the 1959 redesign, the 105e Anglia, is the version most people remember. It had a distinctive reverse-raked rear window that looked futuristic at the time, a new 997cc four-cylinder engine, small but economical, a lightweight body that made it perfect for Britain's fuel-rationed, space-conscious drivers. In its home market, the Anglia was cheap, dependable, and perfectly suited for tight roads and modest incomes. 2. Why it couldn't come to America. Here's the issue. By the late 1950s, the United States government was introducing stronger safety and crash standards. Cars sold in America were expected to meet requirements for bumper strength, crash survivability, and structural integrity. The Anglia, however, was built on a lightweight unibody shell with thin pillars, minimal crash protection, and almost no crumple zones. In UK testing, that was acceptable, but in US testing, it failed to meet durability and impact expectations. As a result, the car was effectively barred from official US sales channels. Ford Motor Company couldn't legally sell it through American dealerships. 3. Why was the ban important? The Anglia wasn't just another small car. It was part of a bigger debate in the 1950s. Should America embrace imports? At the time, U.S. buyers were starting to notice foreign cars like the Volkswagen Beetle, Renault Dauphine, and Austin Healey. These cars were light, efficient, and cheap, but they also raised safety concerns. Regulators were worried that if cars like the Anglia flooded the U.S. market, consumers might end up in vehicles that couldn't protect them on American highways, which were faster and more demanding than Britain's country roads. 4. The irony. Americans still got the Anglia. Even though it was banned from official sales, the Anglia still made its way to the U.S. in small numbers through private imports. American enthusiasts liked its quirky style and compact size. Later on, the Anglia even became famous in U.S. pop culture. Hot rodders used them as lightweight drag racers. And of course, the 105e gained worldwide recognition decades later as the flying car in the Harry Potter films. 5. Legacy of the ban. The ban on the Anglia's export to the U.S. was part of a bigger story about how America shaped global car design. By the early 1960s, foreign manufacturers realized they couldn't just sell their domestic cars in the U.S., they had to design for American standards. That's why later imports, from Toyota to Datsun, were built with stronger frames, bumpers, and safety gear specifically for the U.S. market. The Anglia never became a household name in America, but it became a symbol of a turning point, the moment when regulation and engineering began to collide in the car world. Key takeaway: the 1959 Ford Anglia was loved in Britain, but deemed too flimsy for America. Banned from official U.S. imports due to failing safety and crash standards, it highlighted the growing gap between European small car design and America's tougher highway regulations. Number 7. When we think about the American car scene of the 1950s, we often imagine sleek cruisers with chrome-laden bodies, fins, and luxury styling. But beneath that cultural gloss was another story: the rise of street racing and the unexpected role of the 1950 Ford Tudor sedan in fueling it. 1. The Tudor sedan, a car for the everyman. The 1950 Ford Tudor was one of Ford's shoebox designs, so named because of its slab-sided, modern look. Available in 2-door and 4-door variants, the Tudor was affordable, practical, and above all, popular. Price: cheaper than many luxury models of the era. Weight: relatively light, especially compared to bulky Oldsmobiles and Buicks. Engine: available with Ford's legendary flathead V8, which by 1950 had already developed a reputation as the engine of choice for hot rodders. What Ford unintentionally did was build a family sedan that doubled as a blank canvas for performance enthusiasts. 2. Why the Tudor became a racer's favorite. To understand why states later cracked down, we have to see why the Tudor was such a magnet for young drivers. Cheap to buy used. Within just a few years, second-hand Tudors were everywhere. A young gearhead could pick one up for little money. Lightweight body. Stripped of unnecessary trim, the Tudor was relatively nimble for its era. Flathead V8. The aftermarket was already flooded with speed parts. High-compression heads, dual carb setups, headers that turned a mild family car into a street demon. In essence, the Tudor was one of the first truly democratic hot rods. You didn't need to be rich to own one, and you could modify it in your own garage. 3. The crackdown. Why states banned them. With popularity came problems. By the early 1950s, local authorities were facing a rise in illegal street racing and accidents. The Tudor, with its cheap availability and hot rod-friendly engine, became the poster child for the issue. On sanctioned drag strips, organizers grew worried. Many heavily modified Tudors were unsafe. Backyard mechanics often stripped out safety features, leaving thin frames and worn brakes. Roll cages, fireproofing, and reinforced suspensions were not standard, leading to frequent accidents. As a result, some states and racing associations banned or restricted heavily modified Ford Tudors from official drag racing events. They weren't outlawing the car itself, but they were targeting it as a symbol of unsafe grassroots racing. 4. The Tudor's legacy in hot rodding. Even with restrictions, the Tudor's legend grew. On the street and at the track, it became an icon of DIY performance culture. Teenagers proved you didn't need a Cadillac to go fast. Hot rod magazines of the era often featured Tudors with wild modifications. The Tudor helped bridge the gap between the pre-war hot rod scene, built on 32 Fords, and the muscle car era of the 1960s. In a way, the bans only added to its reputation. Being too fast and too dangerous for sanctioned strips made the Tudor a car of rebellion, perfect for young drivers who wanted to prove something. 5. Historical importance. Looking back, the 1950 Ford Tudor sedan represents the tension of its time. On one hand, it was a humble family sedan that millions used for commuting and raising families. On the other, it became a hot rod outlaw, pushed off official tracks because its modifications made it a danger to its own drivers and spectators. It's no exaggeration to say the Tudor was one of the early building blocks of American car culture, laying the foundation for the muscle car revolution that came just a decade later. Key takeaway: the 1950 Ford Tudor sedan was never meant to be a racing legend. Yet its combination of affordability, lightweight, and flathead V8 power made it irresistible to young hot rodders. Its dominance and associated dangers forced some states and racing bodies to restrict it from competition, cementing its place as both a family car and an outlaw icon of early American performance culture. Number 6. When Ford introduced the 1951 Victoria hardtop, it was more than just another family car. This sleek, pillarless two-door was meant to showcase style, comfort, and the power of Ford's V8 heritage. In the US, it was a hit among buyers who wanted a touch of prestige without Cadillac prices. But when exported to Europe, the Victoria met a very different reception. On the winding rally stages of Britain and continental Europe, it was sometimes barred from competition, not because of mechanical flaws, but because of its sheer size and weight. 1. What was the 1951 Ford Victoria? The Victoria hardtop was Ford's answer to the growing trend of hardtop coupes. Instead of a fixed B-pillar, it had a flowing roofline with full side windows that gave it the look of a convertible, but with the strength of a steel top.
Engine options: the trusty Ford flathead V8 producing about 100 horsepower, or a 6-cylinder in cheaper trims. Curb weight: over 3,300 pounds, heavy by European standards of the time. Style: chrome accents, wide bench seats, and a shoebox body design that was modern and low-slung for its day. In America, it symbolized affordable sophistication. In Europe, however, it was a bit of a behemoth. 2. Why did Europe struggle with it? When a few Victorias made their way overseas, often through U.S. military personnel stationed abroad, they occasionally appeared in rally racing events. But almost immediately, problems arose. Size and handling. On narrow, twisting European rally roads, the Victoria's bulk worked against it. Cars like the MG TD, Fiat 1100, or Saab 92 were nimble, quick to turn, and easy to control. The Ford, in contrast, lumbered around corners. Weight penalties. Rally regulations often considered weight as a performance factor. The Victoria was simply too heavy, giving it an unfair disadvantage and sometimes placing it outside allowable categories. Durability on rough roads. While American highways were smooth and straight, European rallies often ran on gravel, dirt, and even cobblestones. The Ford suspension and brakes were never designed for this punishment. 3. The ban in certain rally events. Because of these issues, some European rally organizers restricted or outright banned the Ford Victoria and other large American hardtops from participating. It wasn't that the car was unsafe, but it was unsuited to the competition format. In some rallies, regulations were changed to limit engine displacement to weight ratios, effectively excluding big American V8 cars. In others, the Ford was deemed non-competitive and barred from entry to keep fields fair. This made sense. A 3,300-pound Ford with a soft suspension was hardly a match for a 1,600-pound Austin Healey darting through mountain passes. 4. Legacy of the ban. Ironically, the restrictions only highlighted the cultural divide between American and European car design in the early 1950s. America built for comfort, cruising, and wide-open highways. The Victoria was a smooth, stylish hardtop meant for Sunday drives and Route 66. Europe built for efficiency, agility, and racing practicality. Cars were lighter, smaller, and geared for tight city streets and mountain switchbacks. The Ford Victoria became an early example of how cars designed for one continent often struggled abroad. Its bans in rallying foreshadowed later decades when global automakers realized they needed to build region-specific models to compete internationally. 5. The Victoria's place in history. Though its rally career was short-lived, the 1951 Ford Victoria remains important for other reasons. It was Ford's first pillarless hardtop coupe, a body style that would dominate American car design through the 1950s. It cemented the popularity of the flathead V8 in an affordable, stylish package. And, culturally, it represented the confidence of post-war America. Big, bold, and unapologetically heavy, even if Europe couldn't handle it on rally stages. Key takeaway: the 1951 Ford Victoria hardtop was loved in America for its style and V8 power, but when exported abroad, its bulk and weight led to restrictions and bans in European rally racing. It wasn't a bad car, it was simply a car built for a different world where wide highways favored comfort over agility. Number 5. When we look back at the early 1950s, Ford was in the middle of redefining itself after World War II. Cars were becoming more modern, more comfortable, and more stylish. The 1952 Ford Customline was a perfect example. A clean, practical sedan aimed at the middle-class American family. It offered affordability, decent performance, and Ford's reputation for reliability. But while it worked well as a family commuter, the Customline didn't earn the same respect when it came to taxi service. In fact, some cities outright banned the 6-cylinder version from taxi fleets for not being durable enough. 1. What was the 1952 Ford Customline?
The Customline sat in the middle of Ford's lineup, positioned above the entry-level Mainline and below the more stylish Crestline. It offered a choice of engines: 226 cubic inch mileage maker inline 6, producing about 101 horsepower, 239 cubic inch flathead V8, producing around 110 horsepower. Buyers appreciated the car's updated styling, which moved away from the pre-war shoebox look and its straightforward mechanics. For families, it was a safe bet. 2. Why taxi fleets considered it. Taxi companies in cities like Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia were always on the hunt for cars that were affordable to purchase in bulk, simple to maintain, rugged enough to withstand non-stop 24-hour use, idling, stop-and-go traffic, and heavy passenger loads. On paper, the Ford Customline seemed like it might fit the bill, especially with the economical six-cylinder engine that promised better fuel efficiency. 3. The problem: durability under stress. In practice, the Customline six-cylinder struggled badly in taxi duty. Reports from regulators and fleet operators cited issues such as overheating. The inline 6 was fine for suburban driving, but overheated in constant stop-and-go traffic. Weak bottom end. The engine's internals wore out quickly when run hard around the clock. Transmission strain. Coupled with heavy clutch use and constant shifting, failures were common. Frame and suspension fatigue. Chicago's rough roads and non-stop use revealed that the Customline wasn't as ruggedly built as Chrysler, DeSoto, or even Chevrolet alternatives. Taxi fleets found that Customlines with the six-cylinder often broke down well before reaching the high mileages they demanded. 4. The ban in certain cities. Because of these issues, taxi regulators in cities like Chicago prohibited the six-cylinder Customline from being purchased for taxi fleets. Their reasoning was simple: the cars couldn't keep up with the demands of non-stop service, leading to unsafe and unreliable vehicles on the road. This wasn't an attack on Ford as a brand. After all, the V8 versions of the Customline were more robust and sometimes used in smaller fleets. But it was a clear signal that Ford's six-cylinder of the early 1950s wasn't up to the same standards as rival engines from Chevrolet, Plymouth, or Dodge. 5. Legacy and lessons learned. The episode with taxi fleets revealed an important truth. Cars built for families weren't always suited for commercial duty. Ford learned that its inline-6 engines of the early 50s needed strengthening, and later designs became more durable. Fleet operators increasingly favored heavier-duty cars from Chrysler and GM, which earned reputations as taxi champions. For Ford, the Customline remained a successful family sedan, but its reputation in professional service was forever tainted. Key takeaway: the 1952 Ford Customline was a fine middle-class family car, but when put to the test as a taxi, especially with the six-cylinder engine, it fell short. Cities like Chicago banned it from taxi use because it lacked the durability and ruggedness required for non-stop urban service, reminding us that what works for the driveway doesn't always survive the demands of the street.
Number 4. By 1952, Ford's F-Series trucks had already made a name for themselves in the United States. The F1 was the light-duty half-ton, while the F2 occupied the three-quarter-ton niche. With its rugged chassis, strong flathead 6 or V8 engines, and no-nonsense design, the F2 was a workhorse for American farmers, construction crews, and small businesses. However, not every country welcomed it with open arms, especially Japan, which had recently emerged from the devastation of World War II. Japan had its own automotive agenda, shaped by government regulations and infrastructure realities. And those factors spelled trouble for a truck as big and powerful as the F2. Japan's post-war auto landscape. In the early 1950s, Japan was still rebuilding. Roads were narrow, bridges were light-duty, and fuel was expensive. The government wanted to prioritize small, efficient vehicles that could navigate cramped city streets and conserve resources.
This led to the introduction of strict vehicle classification laws that capped vehicle dimensions, weight, and engine displacement. Small K cars and light trucks were encouraged, while anything too large or heavy faced punitive taxes or outright bans. Japanese automakers like Toyota, Nissan, and Isuzu were developing compact trucks tailored to these rules, and imported giants like the Ford F2 clashed head-on with those restrictions. Why the F2 was too big? The 1952 Ford F2 pickup was a medium-duty truck by American standards. It had a wheelbase of 114 to 122 inches depending on configuration, curb weight well over 3,500 pounds, flathead 6 or V8 engines with displacements far above what Japan's size regulations permitted, overall width and height that made it ill-suited for Japan's tight urban streets. To Japanese regulators, the F2 wasn't a practical commercial truck. It was a lumbering giant that consumed too much road space, fuel, and resources. The import ban. Instead of allowing such trucks into circulation, Japanese authorities drew a hard line. The F2, along with other medium and heavy-duty American pickups, was restricted from import because it exceeded legal limits for vehicle size and displacement. The policy wasn't just about practicality, it was also a form of protectionism, giving Japanese domestic automakers room to grow without being crushed by American industrial might. So while the F2 sold well in North America, Europe, and parts of Latin America, it never made serious inroads into the Japanese market. The restrictions kept it out, and Japanese buyers turned instead to homegrown alternatives like the Toyota Toa Ace or Nissan Junior, compact trucks designed with the nation's infrastructure in mind. Broader implications. This restriction highlights how national policy and infrastructure shape the car market. In America, where roads were wide and gas was cheap, the F2 thrived. In Japan, it was impractical and unwanted. Ford couldn't simply shrink the F2 to fit Japan's rules without undermining its utility. In hindsight, this ban foreshadowed decades of divergence. American trucks got bigger and more powerful, while Japanese trucks stayed small and efficient. Interestingly, decades later, compact Japanese pickups like the Toyota Hilux and Nissan Hardbody would flood into the U.S., the very opposite of what happened in the early 1950s. Conclusion. The story of the 1952 Ford F2 pickup's restriction in Japan is more than a tale of bureaucratic red tape. It reflects how post-war governments steered automotive development, how infrastructure limits dictated vehicle design, and how protectionist policies helped Japan nurture its own auto industry. For Ford, the F2 was a durable work truck, but for Japan in the 1950s, it was simply too large, too thirsty, and too foreign. Number 3. When we think of NASCAR in the early 1950s, it wasn't the highly commercialized spectacle we know today. Back then, it was very close to true stock car racing, cars you could buy straight from a dealership, taken to the track with minimal modification. But naturally, racers sought every possible advantage. One such advantage came in the form of a simple but clever loophole, running lightweight business coupes like the 1953 Ford Mainline. And it worked so well that NASCAR eventually had to step in and ban them. What was the Ford Mainline business coupe? The Mainline was Ford's entry-level series in 1953. Stripped of luxury features, it was aimed at practical buyers, salesmen, small business owners, and budget-conscious drivers. The business coupe, in particular, was the lightest and most bare-bones body style. Key traits included no rear seat, more cargo space for sales samples, minimal chrome and trim, basic interior with little to no insulation or comfort, lighter curb weight than sedans and hardtops. Now, add to that the availability of Ford's flathead V8 or even the newer Y-Block V8, and you had the perfect sleeper. Small, light, and capable of holding its own in competition. Why it was attractive to racers.
For racers in the early 1950s, weight was everything. NASCAR didn't yet have today's highly technical restrictions and balance of performance rules. If a factory-built car was lighter, it automatically had an advantage in acceleration, cornering, and even braking. The business coupe gave drivers a few hundred pounds of weight savings compared to other Ford body styles, while still running the same V8 engines. That meant the same horsepower was moving less mass. On short tracks, dirt ovals, and even superspeedways, that mattered. In essence, the business coupe became the racing world's version of a loophole car, legal but unfairly optimized. NASCAR's response: the ban. By the mid-1950s, NASCAR officials noticed that fields were becoming filled with business coupes. Other competitors complained that it wasn't a level playing field. Fans wanted to see cars that reflected what the average person could buy at the dealership, not stripped-down specialty models that most buyers didn't own. So NASCAR made a rule change. Certain lightweight body styles, like the business coupe, were outlawed in stock car racing classes. The decision leveled the field, forcing drivers to compete with heavier sedans, hardtops, and coupes that better represented mainstream production cars. Broader implications. This ban shows how NASCAR was already wrestling with the balance between stock authenticity and competitive fairness. If they allowed cars like the 1953 Mainline business coupe, racing would drift away from the cars people drove every day. By banning it, NASCAR preserved both parity on the track and the illusion that Sunday's winners were cars you could buy on Monday. Interestingly, this wouldn't be the last time NASCAR cracked down on factory quirks. In later decades, cars like the Dodge Daytona and Plymouth Superbird, with their radical aerodynamics, also faced restrictions or bans when their performance advantages were too great. Conclusion. The 1953 Ford Mainline business coupe may look like a humble, stripped-down entry-level car, but on the racetrack, it was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Its lack of weight gave racers a massive edge, so much so that NASCAR stepped in and banned it from competition in certain classes. In doing so, NASCAR reinforced its role as the regulator of fairness, keeping the sport tied to the cars of everyday America while still allowing competitive excitement.
Number 2. In 1955, Ford decided to chase the growing American fascination with wagons. Families were expanding, suburbs were booming, and station wagons were becoming the ultimate symbol of practicality. But Ford also wanted to add a touch of class to the wagon market. Enter the Ford Parklane, a one-year-only, upscale station wagon that was positioned as the crown jewel of Ford's two-door wagons. On paper, it seemed like a perfect blend of style and utility. But for police and taxi fleets, the Parklane was more headache than help. In fact, some jurisdictions outright banned it from their procurement lists. What was the Parklane wagon? The 1955 Parklane was essentially Ford's answer to Chevrolet's Bel Air Nomad. It was built as a two-door wagon, but dressed up with luxury appointments usually reserved for Ford's premium Fairlane line. Key features included fancy chrome trim and two-tone paint schemes, plush interior appointments similar to Ford's upscale sedans, wood grain details, carpeting, and bright work that made it feel less like a work vehicle and more like a personal luxury car. Powerful V8 options, which gave it good performance compared to basic wagons. The Parklane was marketed toward middle-class families who wanted wagon practicality without sacrificing style. Why fleets avoided it? Police departments and taxi companies in the 1950s were laser-focused on two things: cost and durability. The Parklane, however, failed both tests. Too luxurious and expensive. The Parklane's upscale trim, chrome, and plush interiors made it far more expensive than Ford's basic wagons. For fleets that bought dozens or even hundreds of cars at a time, the cost premium was unjustifiable. Maintenance concerns. Fancy trim and luxury fittings meant more things to break or wear out under constant use. Taxi regulators and police procurement officers saw it as unnecessary complication. Two-door layout. Unlike four-door wagons, which were easier for passengers to enter and exit, the two-door Parklane was impractical for fleet service. Loading passengers or even hauling cargo was simply less efficient. Fleet restrictions. Some cities and states had procurement guidelines that outright prohibited luxury models from fleet bidding. The Parklane, by definition, fell into that category. Thus, it wasn't just avoided, it was banned in some fleet contracts. The result, a short-lived experiment. Because of these drawbacks, the Parklane lasted only one model year, 1955. Fleet buyers didn't want it, and even private buyers often opted for more practical four-door wagons. Ford replaced it the following year with the Ford Ranch Wagon and Ford Country sedan and wagon lines, which were more practical and less flashy. The lesson was clear. Wagons could be stylish, but they still needed to serve their core role as workhorses for families and fleets. Conclusion. The 1955 Ford Parklane wagon was a bold attempt to blend luxury with utility, but it turned out to be too far ahead of what the fleet market and even many families wanted. For taxi regulators and police procurement officers, it was too luxurious, too expensive, and too impractical. Some jurisdictions banned it outright from fleet bidding lists, ensuring that it never gained traction in the commercial world. Today, however, because of its short production run and its unique place in Ford's lineup, the Parklane has become a rare collectible. Proof that even when a car fails in its intended market, it can still carve out a lasting legacy.
Number 1. In the mid-1950s, NASCAR was still young but growing fast. Automakers realized that "win on Sunday, sell on Monday" wasn't just a saying, it was a powerful marketing tool. Ford, Chevrolet, Chrysler, and others were eager to get their sleek new models onto the track to prove their worth. One of Ford's sharpest designs of the era was the 1956 Ford Victoria Coupe, a stylish two-door hardtop that combined looks, performance, and lighter weight than many of its sedan siblings. But that sleekness turned out to be a problem, at least in NASCAR's eyes. The Victoria Coupe, a quick overview. The Ford Victoria was part of the Fairlane lineup, sitting just below the top luxury trims. It was known for two-door hardtop design, no center pillar, giving it a low, wide, sporty look. Lighter construction than comparable four-door sedans. Strong V8 options, including Ford's popular Y-block engines, which gave it the punch needed for competitive racing. On the streets, the Victoria was a hit with families who wanted a stylish coupe. But on the track, its lightweight and aerodynamic lines gave it a natural edge. NASCAR's problem with the Victoria. By 1956, NASCAR was struggling to keep competition fair. Some body styles had clear advantages that made them dominant on the oval tracks. The Ford Victoria Coupe, with its sleek hardtop roofline and reduced weight, was one of them. Here's why NASCAR stepped in. Weight advantage. Compared to heavier four-door sedans, the Victoria hardtop was simply lighter. Less weight meant faster acceleration and better handling on short tracks. Aerodynamic edge. The hardtop roofline cut through the air more smoothly than boxier sedans. On high-speed superspeedways, this translated to more top speed and less drag. Unfair competition. Other manufacturers complained that allowing the Victoria Coupe tilted the playing field. NASCAR wanted races to reflect showroom cars, not specially selected body styles that customers rarely bought in large numbers. As a result, certain Victoria body styles, particularly the lightweight two-door hardtops, were restricted or outright banned in some NASCAR classes. NASCAR's philosophy in the 1950s. It's important to remember that NASCAR's early identity was built on stock cars being truly stock. If the average buyer couldn't walk into a dealership and buy something similar, NASCAR didn't want it dominating the track. Cars that provided unfair aero or weight advantages were seen as a distortion of that mission. This is why NASCAR began enforcing rules about minimum weights, body styles, and even production numbers. The Victoria Coupe fell victim to these changes. Aftermath and legacy. Ford wasn't happy about restrictions, but the company adapted. The ban or restriction on certain Victoria hardtops pushed teams toward using more common sedan body styles, leveling the competition. Ironically, the same traits that got the Victoria into trouble, its sleek looks, light build, and sporty personality, are what make it a desirable collector car today. Conclusion. The 1956 Ford Victoria Coupe was proof of how even small design differences, like roofline and body weight, could have a big impact in NASCAR's early days. Its lightweight two-door hardtop body gave Ford an advantage that NASCAR deemed too much for fair competition. By banning or restricting the Victoria Coupe in certain classes, NASCAR was trying to keep stock car racing true to its mission: close, fair battles with cars the public could actually buy. And in that sense, the Victoria helped shape NASCAR's evolving rulebook, reminding everyone that racing wasn't just about speed, it was also about fairness.